Welcome. Now, I'm not seeing the record button on my end, but if it is recording, then here we go. Now recording has started. Fabulous. All right. Welcome, Demi and Dominique. That is quite a coincidence. I understand that Dominique, you have a child who's in Demi's classroom, and the two of you share the same last name. Are you related in any way?
Not that I know of.
No. Well, and that is just, the world is full of coincidences sometimes, isn't it? So I'm really glad that you were able to fit in an hour here today for us to meet. And as your mediator, I'm happy to take this opportunity to facilitate your conversation. And thank you also for meeting with me individually so I can understand a little bit about what was going on in the situation from your individual perspective. And as we talked about in our private meetings, that today is an opportunity for you to actually share those individual perspectives with each other. So before we get started, if you can just allow me, I need about 10 minutes to go over some housekeeping items with you. And in fact, I actually have a checklist that I make reference to that just really helps me to make sure that I don't miss anything. So if you don't mind, I'll refer to that. And if you have questions as I go along with anything, just feel free to jot them down. And then once I've had a chance to go over the full checklist, I will see what your questions are before we move on. And so before I get started, let me just check to see if that works for both of you.
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay, great. So a few logistics. We booked aside an hour today, and it may be that at the end of the hour, you feel like you've talked through the situation and you have a plan, and we'll talk at that time about what you would like to do. If it would be helpful for me to write up what's called a memorandum of understanding that, sets out what your plan is, or if you just want something simple like an email confirming that you've completed your mediation and maybe even a summary of some of the things you've talked about. So once we get to that point, we can talk about that further. Now, I want to let you know, though, it's not uncommon to not quite get finished within an hour. So we might just get started in the conversation and actually end up with a plan for what we do next, which could result in having other meetings. So just want to set your expectations in that regard. I will be taking some notes, and those notes are just for my reference. Everything that we talk about is confidential and what we call on a without prejudice basis, which means you could never, if you ended up in some type of formal kind of proceedings, like in court for some reason, you couldn't call on me to have me give evidence about what we talked about. And the whole reason for that is to give you the privacy to have a really honest conversation and not worry that something's going to be held against you outside of this conversation. So if the two of you are taking notes as well, just keep that in mind that those notes should remain private as well. And, you might even find that it's good just to destroy them afterwards. And I might keep the notes on my file for a period of time, but that's still, I will make sure that they remain confidential. If we were in person, one of the things that we would talk about would be things like, hey, pull out your cell phone and make sure it's shut off so that nobody, calls and disturbs us. But I think that there are still some important things for us to touch on when we're meeting virtually like this that can still be distractions. So you might actually be like me and have your phone beside you. So unless you're expecting some, and you're worried about maybe missing an important call, if you can just really honor this time that we have together, have your phone off, shut off any other tabs that you have. And I can't see, who's around you. So if I can just confirm that you're both in a space that's private, you don't have anybody that would be listening in?
No, I'm just in a private office.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm in a private office as well.
Okay, great. And so, one more thing about this whole confidentiality piece is that we wouldn't be recording anything except for this this meeting that we've agreed to record. And so if you had other devices or you were recording on your own device for a different purpose, that wouldn't be something that would be acceptable in mediation. So you both agree to that as well? Okay, great. I'm just looking at my list to see what else to cover off here. An hour is not very long, but you might still feel like you need a break. So if at some point you need a break, just let me know. And there may also be times where something comes up that I think that it would be helpful to check in with you individually. And so that's what's called a caucus. And if I check in with one of you, I'll also check in with the others. So those private check-in meetings with you, I'd make sure that you each had an opportunity. But if there's something that you'd like to talk to me about privately, you could also raise that. You know that I'm a lawyer, but in this setting, I'm your mediator. So that means I'm not here to give legal advice, and I am here not on behalf of one of you to advocate for a position, but I'm here to help both of you from the place of being neutral and impartial, and just really to try to create an environment for you to have an open conversation. So one that is where we're all engaging from a place of being patient and respectful. That openness will lead to hopefully a greater understanding on both parts, and to really promote that, to have a willingness to disclose what's actually important to you. So if you keep in mind that this is this private type of opportunity, then really engage in that way. Does that make sense as far as some guidelines? Okay. And when I finish my checklist, I'll also just check back in with you to see if you have additional guidelines that you would like to have as part of our conversation, just to promote that good conversation and effective communication. The agreement to mediate that I went over with each of you, previously, you've both signed that and returned that to me. So that's part of my file, and thank you for doing that. The process itself, I mean, we're spending this little bit of housekeeping time just to kind of get settled in, and I'm almost done my list. And then I want to hear from each of you just briefly as to what you see as the important things to talk about in today's meeting. We'll create a bit of an agenda, and from there, we'll provide each of you an opportunity to really speak to the things that are important to you, your priorities in getting this resolved, the expectations you have around what this could look like, any assumptions that maybe you're operating under that you'd like to raise and question to see if you have all the information that you need, and what concerns you might have, and kind of what your overall goals and hopes are for the outcome of all of this. And once we've had a chance to just really have that good, thorough conversation, we'll move into a time of being able to create options. So thinking about all of the ways in which you could potentially resolve the situation that still addresses those interests that both of you have brought today to say that are really important. And if you're able to, choose something out of those options, and we'll evaluate, make sure it addresses your needs, and then put that plan in place for what it looks like after today's meeting. So it's kind of your overview of what we'll be doing today. You both, from talking to you separately before today's meeting, my sense is that, you're the ones that have the knowledge about what is going on firsthand, and you're here with your authority, right? That Demi, as the teacher, you have some authority within your classroom, and Dominique, of course, you're coming here with your parental authority. So can I just check to see, do either of you also have anybody else that you would need to either talk to before you could reach an agreement, or that you would want to be sharing the outcomes of the mediation?
Well, I'll definitely need to share the outcomes of the mediation with my spouse and with Kelly. Kelly's been really concerned about, she doesn't even want to go to school anymore. So I'll definitely need to share whatever plan and agreement we come up with some of my family members.
Okay, and then Demi, from your perspective, is there, on that authority piece and anybody else that you might need to talk to?
I can commit to any kind of agreements that are related to things that I can do myself. But if there's any kind of need for further funding, we might need to get in touch with a special needs kind of organization that helps bring that kind of support into classrooms. We might need to talk to the principal about those expenditures, those sorts of things. So it would just kind of depend on what we agree to today.
Sure. Okay, so you've both heard each other's kind of parameters as far as what you're able to talk about today and who else you need to share that information with. Do either of you have any concerns about what you've heard?
No.
All right, and so are you both ready to get started? Okay, excellent. So as I mentioned earlier, the way that we kind of get things going here is just to get a sense of, like, let's make a list, right? A list of some of the things that we need to talk about. And so if I can actually get a snapshot from each of you and, maybe 2 or 3 sentences as to what you think is the fundamental issue that has brought you here today, and some of the things that you think would be helpful to talk about in order to try to address that issue or that problem that has brought you here. And so either of you can begin. Who would be comfortable to get started?
I think Dominique should go first.
Yeah, I can definitely go first. So really, we're here to talk because Demi is Kelly's elementary school teacher. Kelly's my daughter. She's 9 years old, and she recently got an ADHD diagnosis. And the way that Demi is handling Kelly in class is just, it's really troubling to me and my spouse, and it's really troubling to just like our whole family system, because a couple of weeks, 2 months ago, rather, actually, like I sat down with Demi and told her the ways to deal with Kelly's outbursts and like how to take care of Kelly and motivate her. And she was already struggling with math. And then recently I found out, not even from the school, but I found out from my daughter that she's been kept out of math class recently, which like is extremely troubling. That is like the number one thing that I told Demi not to do when we had our previous meeting. Like timeouts do not work for kids with ADHD at all, and especially doesn't work with for Kelly within the math situation. Like this is a brand new school for Kelly. She's having trouble making friends, and I'm not sure how much I could go into everything, but I guess that's kind of like my snapshot of what's concerning me today.
Okay. Thank you, Dominique. And yes, these are just kind of snapshots, and we'll sort of pull out what are some of the things that will be helpful to talk about. And when we get deeper into those topics, then each of you will have lots of time to be able to give as much information as needed. So thank you. So Demi, your snapshot as to what brings you here today and the things that you think need to be talked about.
Well, Dominique and her spouse contacted the principal of the school that I work at to kind of demand that I be dealt with. And I'm not really sure what remedy they were looking for at that time. It was a pretty scary thing for me because it's like I'm just doing the best I can with us being back to having most of the kids at our school at least 3 days a week with the COVID parameters. and a bunch of teachers got laid off, and we don't have the funding for teachers' aides and stuff like that. So it's like our classroom sizes are huge, totally unmanageable. And Kelly in particular, she knows that her mom has said, hey, this is how to deal with my behavior. So I feel like part of what's going on for her is that she knows that I've kind of been instructed to give her special one-on-one time. So then she overacts like crazy and stuff like that on purpose so that she can have one-on-one time with me. And that's just not feasible when I have a class of like 28 kids, 9-year-olds who are rambunctious at the best of times. So if I need 15 minutes with her outside the classroom just so that the rest of the kids can just focus and concentrate, I don't really see that as being detrimental to her in any way. In fact, if I keep her in the class, being all rambunctious is detrimental to all the other kids. So that's kind of what happened. And I think that the whole thing kind of got blown out of proportion, because I just don't think it's that big of a deal.
Yeah, so, and that's like exactly the problem. So like, first of all of the,
I'm sorry, Dominique.
I feel like the position that Demi's coming from is just really a place of not understanding ADHD at all. Like specifically, she just said that Kelly does these things on purpose, and it's like she has a condition. It's not on purpose, and I think that this is part of the reason this conversation isn't working.
Yes. Okay, and I'm sorry to interrupt you there, Dominique. I just wanted to make sure that we had captured an agenda, and so we have a bit of a roadmap for what we'll all talk about, and some of that information about Kelly's situation in particular and her ADHD will be definitely important to share. So if it's okay with both of you, I'm just going to share my screen here. And I guess something that I didn't think to mention before at the beginning is, this is a virtual environment where technology can sometimes interfere. So if you get disconnected or the screen isn't working, like just let me know and we'll play it by ear here and we'll fix it as we go along. So are you seeing a white screen here on your screen?
Yes.
Kind of like a little white block. Okay. So
yeah, it looks like it's loading.
Yeah, so while it's loading, I will just, here we go. I want to make sure I can just do some typing here. And this is just so that it can help us focus. And so and please, if I put any words on here that aren't quite right, just correct me because I'm just, trying to think about how we could have this conversation in the moment. And the two of you, of course, understand it much better than I would. So it strikes me that really what has brought you here is wanting to have a discussion about Kelly and Kelly in her basically her educational experience. Would that be sort of the overarching issue?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
To me, you look contemplative. I just want to see does that capture what you believe has brought you here?
Yeah.
Okay, so I always like to think of this as it's almost like an umbrella, right? Like there's something that happens that brings us to mediation. So we have Kelly's educational experience and sort of, what that's going to look like. And then there are things that are going to be important to talk about that are like what I would call like sort of like subtopics, right? If we were to list the subtopics of things that are going to be important to talk about around Kelly's educational experience, let's make a list of, 2 or 3 things that you think that might be important to talk about. And just based on what you've said, a couple of things that have jumped out for me, but I'm thinking it might be good just to hear from you what your priorities are in terms of 2 or 3 things that we could put on this list for today.
I don't know how to say this in a way that's polite, but I guess just like for me, it's really important to talk about how it's Demi's job to be the teacher. And I feel like a lot of the time she scapegoats Kelly, and makes it sound like things are Kelly's fault, or Kelly needs to be better, or Kelly needs to do X, Y, and Z. So I don't know, maybe like expectations, or I feel like that needs to be cleared up.
And I'm wondering, maybe roles and expectations capture what you've said. Does that resonate with you, Demi, as something that would be helpful to talk about today?
I guess. I think that it's a little bit rich for Dominique to kind of be like, oh, it's your job to be the teacher. And I would love to see her try to manage 28 unruly 9-year-olds in the middle of a global pandemic, where we're trying to keep people's masks on, trying to keep them social distanced. So I'd love to talk about some ideas that can meet Dominique's expectations of me, that it can also be realistic considering what I'm dealing with as a teacher.
Well, and perhaps if we add roles and realistic expectations, for everyone, because what I'm hearing you both speak to is needing that there may be some value in both of you being able to talk about what the needs are that Kelly has, as well as some of the I don't know if this is the right word or not to me, but it almost sounds like maybe constraints for your situation. So what it looks like day to day in the classroom. So those roles and what the realistic expectations are for everyone involved. And I would imagine, given your sort of what sounds like brought you here today, it sounds to me like, Dominique, that you and your spouse recognize that you have a role in all of this too, based on what information you've come to the school to share, and those concerns. So it's roles and realistic expectations for Kelly, as well as for the school and Demi, and for Dominique and Kelly's dad. Would that kind of be accurate? So that's one topic. Is there another topic that we might be able to talk about today too in our short time together?
I guess something around ADHD supports or something like that. Like I took a couple classes and seminars throughout my career about managing attention deficit disorder and attention hyperactive disorder. But I mean, I'm no expert. And Kelly is actually the first child who I've ever, I've had other children with diagnoses, but nothing that has interfered to this extent. So I guess exploring what kind of things are out there, again, keeping in mind that the school has zilch for money right now.
Well, and ultimately, as you have this discussion and you get to a stage where you're doing some creative thinking about what is possible, you may find that there are some things that you're not sure whether it will work or not, and you'll have to explore further. But you can, as you have ideas too, you can just jot them down for when we get to that part. Dominique, as far as having some discussion about ADHD supports, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, definitely. I'm a little bit Demi keeps talking about how there aren't resources at the school, and I can appreciate that. But I also think that if that's the situation, and the treatment of Kelly is going to stay the same, then I think we need to talk about a plan for transitioning to her to a different school, and how that would look in terms of, I know we're in the middle of the semester right now, and making friends is really important for 9-year-olds. So even just like right now, while I'm listening to me, I'm trying to think of how to get her into a different school without having it be like a huge social nightmare for her. So I also just like thinking about the plan going forward. Definitely talking about ADHD supports. I felt like I shared what I could with Demi in terms of like the suggestions that we got from Kelly's doctor, and the different things that we saw worked well for her at home. So when Demi says ADHD supports and also talks about how there aren't any resources at the school, I'm curious to know what she means.
Okay, so having some understanding perhaps even about, oh, sorry, here we go, let's just change that. So I'm wondering if this is maybe about sharing information, that there's some subtopics to that as well, where, you know, some further subtopics, I guess, if I can get this to, where it's the sharing the information perhaps about ADHD, but it's also about what resources are available. And then you had mentioned friends and that maybe social environment and plan for going forward. So I just jotted those down while you mentioned them. And I guess I just wondered, you know, it's maybe that's the plan for going forward is kind of that overarching question, right? So so if we were to make this a question, what is the plan going forward for Kelly's educational experience? And I'll just see if I can move this up so you can see it all. I guess it doesn't matter, because if I'm going to take this last part out then. So this is one of the things about living in this new world is that people tend to be relatively forgiving about trying to figure out some of the technology. So thank you for your patience. So if we were to look at this, and I'm interested in your input as well, Demi, on these last couple of things here that have just been adjusted to the agenda. So what do you think that this is looking like as far as kind of changing that to be not just specific to ADHD supports, but really sharing information about the ADHD part as well as the resources and the social environment?
I appreciate that Dominique and her spouse at the beginning of the term were like, hey, here are some strategies and ways. And believe me, these were strategies that I already knew from the seminars and the classes that I've taken in the past. The fact is that the one-on-one kind of stuff that Kelly needs is really unattainable, unrealistic at this time, given the size of the class and what's going on. So I feel a little bit talked down to, and like I'm an idiot when Dominique keeps like to me, it just sounds like Dominique saying I'm bad at my job, when it's like, the fact is that I'm trying to teach in these unprecedented times with a child who has special needs. So I do just want to make that clear, that it's not that I don't know how to do my job, and it's not that I've totally forgotten the conversations that I've had with Dominique and her spouse. And the social environment piece is that Kelly is so popular with the other kids. And this is part of what's going on, is that as much as I appreciate that Dominique is saying Kelly's not doing it on purpose, she does have a ton of friends, and she's always talking, always distracting them. And I know some of that is ADHD, but I also know that if a kid without ADHD was acting that way, I would still ask them to go and sit in the hall, because they're being disruptive to the rest of the class and the learning environment. So in terms of disrupting her, I don't want Kelly to leave my class. She's really bright. When she applies herself, she does really wonderful schoolwork. So I don't want her to leave the school. But I also want to say that she won't have any problems making friends elsewhere. She's a very popular, sociable kind of kid. So anyway, yeah, I'm comfortable talking about everything that's on this list
Okay, yeah, okay, thank you, Demi, for that, because I just wanted to check in, as you were talking, it struck me that part of that information sharing is also about the teaching environment. And as far as the those options around what will happen with Kelly's educational experience, certainly her changing schools may be one of the options that you end up considering. Her staying at this school is an option, and thinking about all of the, I'd say, pros and cons to the different options and how they line up with the things that you will identify and hear from each other today that are important. That's going to be really what our standard is, because mediation isn't about just trying to find some kind of patch through. It's really about trying to put all of the best ideas forward and then measure that up against really the outcomes that you're looking for. And so the concerns that you might have, Dominique, around Kelly and her friends and the social environment and the information that Demi that you might have to be able to share that might address some of those concerns is a great example of some of that conversation that we can expect to have. So would it be correct then that I'm hearing you both agree that this would be an acceptable agenda here for us?
Mhm.
Okay, great. So if the goal here is we're trying to figure out, what will be the plan going forward for Kelly's educational experience, and we can talk about roles and realistic expectations for everyone. We can talk about some sharing of information related to ADHD, the resources that are available in the teaching environment, as well as being able to talk about social environment. Where would you like to start? Because this is your conversation to have, and what would you prioritize as the first thing you'd like to talk about?
Well, I wonder if we could just start with some information sharing, because I can appreciate that when Demi says she doesn't want to be talked down to, yeah, I get it. I'm not a teacher, so I don't know everything about teaching, but she also keeps mentioning the solution of one-on-one work, which of course is not the only thing that we talked about in our last meeting. So I also, I really think that Kelly is an honest kid and that she's a great kid, but at the end of the day, she is 9 years old, and I'm under no illusions around the fact that sometimes kids present things in certain ways that maybe aren't representative of the situation. So I think it would make sense to start with some sharing of information and what things Demi has tried. But that's just,
That's what your vote is. Okay, great. Thank you. And Demi, what would you like to prioritize?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with doing a little bit of information sharing.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I will just, I'm going to take down my white screen or whiteboard, I guess it's called, and then we can see each other a little bit better. And if we can benefit from having that screen up again, I will certainly throw it back up again. So some information sharing. So we talked about information sharing around ADHD, about resources available and the teaching environment. So that's all kind of part of this discussion. And again, whoever wants to kind of kick things off and share the information that you think would be helpful for the other person to know and better understand.
Well, I'll just say so my main source of information is my daughter. I'm not in the classroom. I'm not physically there. So I have to rely solely on what my 9-year-old is telling me. And the things that she tells me are terrible to hear as a parent. They're absolutely terrible to hear as a parent. So the first 2 months I felt went really, really well. And then for whatever reason, in these past 2 weeks, she's having temper tantrums before leaving for school because she says that she just doesn't want to get sent out of math class again. She is utterly humiliated by being sent out of class and being made to stand outside. And she's talking about how she's not going to have any friends and how she's all alone and she's singled out. And it's a really terrible experience for her. She's also told me that it's happened every day last week. Every math class last week, she was sent out of the class. And the other information that she's given me. Like I talked to her about the ADHD kind of stuff. Like I asked, have you had the option to do like a physical activity break, or are you able to have like your fidget toys in class? And I asked her if, has your teacher come up with any special jobs so that you can have like a role in the classroom? And her answer to all of these things is no. So the information I'm operating off of is a little 9-year-old who is weeping and screaming and just like crushed and heartbroken because she feels like her teacher doesn't like her, and she feels like all the kids in her class don't like her, and she's being really singled out. So like that's the information that I have, and that's all the information that I have.
And so, Dominique, the information that you have in terms of what Kelly is experiencing, so that's that information. Do you have other information that you would also want to share with Demi about? And I appreciate you mentioned earlier that you've already shared information about the ADHD, but is there anything else you had, because you had mentioned before about some things that don't work for ADHD students, and could you maybe expand a little bit on that?
Sure. So like there's 2 points that I think are important when we talk about what's not going to work for ADHD students. And so the first one is that timeouts just don't work for her brain. Like it's not, I understand that for a lot of other kids, separating them from the group for a few minutes can calm them down. For Kelly, it does the exact opposite effect because it makes her really anxious to be separated from everybody else. She's very extroverted, she's very outgoing, and that ties right into her ADHD, that she does much better around people. So timeouts or isolating her like really exacerbate the problem. And so that's the one thing. And then the other thing is on the stuff that I know tend to work better for her. Yeah, one-on-one attention from an adult for sure. I recognize that there's like a resource difficulty there. In an ideal world, she would have a teacher's aide in class with her. And I've talked to the principal about that. It's not possible right now, but maybe it's something to look at in the future. But the other kinds of things like physical activity breaks, I know that that's a little bit more difficult when you're in grade 4 because you have like specific recess times. But even just being able to like get up from her desk and walk around, which is what ties into like having special jobs. Like at home, there are specific things that she can get excited about when she can take responsibility for, and it helps her being able to be focused, to feel like she has a role to play. So just as like an example, Christmas is a really overwhelming time for Kelly, and birthdays are really overwhelming times for Kelly because she gets so excited because there are people everywhere and she loves people and she's having fun and she wants to run around and she's disruptive, right? Like she can be disruptive. But one of the things that really helps on those special occasions is when she can be Santa's little elf. So instead of just being left to her own device to try to self-regulate, which is something that she can't do. Like that's the thing that's important to remember. Like she can't, like we can't just expect this 9-year-old to totally self-regulate. So in those situations, giving her like, you're Santa's helper, your job is to like give the presents to everybody. She has a role. Or at birthday parties, you're helping with decorations, you're helping with these other things. Like if she can feel a real sense of belonging, she does a lot better. So those are some of the things like why these timeouts are so upsetting for our family, just because I really see them as like the absolute opposite of what is going to be best for Kelly being able to learn.
So thank you, Dominique. And, as we want to be able to give you both an opportunity to be able to speak as we go along through this mediation process, but sometimes you'll have other things that you'll want to add. So just so you know, and we kind of say, all right, well, like, let's get the Demi's perspective now and what information she would like to share on this agenda topic. It doesn't mean that this is the only opportunity for you to speak, Dominique, but I do just want to summarize if I can and see if I've captured the main things that you're identifying. Is that you're hearing things from Kelly that are concerning for you, and you have ideas around things that you have experienced work well for Kelly. And at the same time, I heard you also recognize that there are limitations within the school itself, and ultimately then part of what you're here for today then is to see what might be possible to impact the experience in a positive way.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So Demi, is on this information sharing piece around what information you already have about ADHD that maybe you have some questions about, or the resources you had identified that you either have access to or that might be out there that you'd like to speak about, or that educational environment, especially in this COVID type of situation. You had earlier said that this is all quite, I think you had used the words that it makes you fearful, what's all happening with this situation. So what would you like to kind of share for information?
Sure. So first, let's start with COVID, which is really not ideal for any student who has any kind of special needs, because we have the sensory distraction of having a mask on your face, which is often difficult for many people, whether they're on the ADHD spectrum or whether they're on the autism spectrum. It's just a real nightmare, but we have to do it. Unfortunately, there's no exemption for somebody that has a sensory thing. So that's one thing. I know it's really distracting for Kelly. She's always pulling on her mask. She's always adjusting her mask. It's a constant distraction for her. And there's nothing I can do about that, right? So if she's having trouble focusing on something and she's talking about her mask or moving around her mask or anything, there's literally nothing I can do. In addition to that, getting her to do any kind of physical activities is very hard, because every section of the school, when it's not in use, has to be blocked off and cannot be used. And then when it is used, it needs to be sanitized. So we've had to really up all of our efforts in terms of cleanliness around the whole school. And I can't send a 9-year-old outside to run around without supervision either. So those kind of physical breaks, as much as I would love to give her a physical break every time she has an outburst or is inappropriately impulsive or something like that, where do I put her for those? Do I put her in the corner to do jumping jacks or jump squats or something like that? Well, that doesn't really help with the distractibility, because then all the other 9-year-olds are like, oh, okay, well, Kelly gets to get up and jump around. And they can't put together that the reason why is because I'm trying to manage her ADHD. And I'm not trying to make this a punishment when I put her out of the room. She's more than welcome to bring a book or a workbook or something to do out in the hallway. It's merely because she's talking to her classmates. She's taking the work away from them. She's holding it up. She's looking at it. She's drawing pictures, fiddling with her mask, asking to switch masks with other kids, and all that kind of stuff. The only way to manage it is to separate her from the class momentarily. And yes, it would appear that she has been kicked out of class 3 times in the last 2 weeks. And for her, I understand how that might feel. I've missed every math class because we're only in person 3 days a week, and then we're online 2 days a week, which also is a nightmare for someone with ADHD. She's always upside down, her feet are in the air on the Zoom. So I just see these 2 little feet, and anyway, it's just, honestly, it's very difficult to even implement these strategies in this COVID world, right? So that's really hard. And then the other problem with something like ADHD, which is a spectrum disorder, and on top of it, it's like every case is so unique, and everyone's strategies for dealing with their symptoms are different. Like if you Google anything about ADHD, it's like it could be like this, or it could be exactly the opposite. So in my training, lots of times they've said, you know, if you're having a child that has like these impulsivity and self-regulation problems, giving them a timeout helps them calm down. And I hear what Dominique's saying, that it does the opposite for Kelly, because then it stresses her out about how she's appearing to her peers and her relationship with me. But I don't really know what other kind of strategy I could have other than a teacher's aide. So that's a little bit of the information that I have, because I could see if I could have a teacher aide like sitting with her, like right beside her, redirecting her all the time. That would be really helpful, and that would make up for it. But I'm 1 against 28. So it's really hard to put that kind of expectation on me that I could sit right beside her the whole time. And then there's also the optics for the rest of the class. Again, 9-year-olds don't really understand that, okay, Kelly needs these special things. They are kind of almost perceiving it like favoritism, like, oh, Kelly gets all the special treatment from the teacher. And the fidget toys, I would love to endorse the use of fidget toys. Unfortunately, with our school right now and the COVID stuff, we're not really allowed to have items like that, that are not specifically related. So, I mean, what we could do about that specifically is we could talk to the principal about maybe if there could be an exemption made specifically for Kelly, if Dominique feels like the fidget toys would make a significant difference, because I'm sorry to hear that that wasn't properly communicated, that she can't have the fidget toys because of the COVID stuff. But that's what's going on for that specific issue.
So if I can do a similar thing with you, Demi, that, you know, with Dominique, just a bit of a summary of some of the things that I think that you highlighted is that some of the perhaps strategies that you would be utilizing, like the physical activities or the fidget toys, that they're not as accessible to you at this point because of COVID, and you have the large classroom, and there are some specific things that you sort of used as examples of things like, you know, the fidgeting with masks, or the taking papers, and things that are creating some disruptions in the classroom. And it sounds like one of your concerns is about how to manage the rest of the class if they perceive that Kelly is getting different treatment, that they would also like to have that type of one-on-one time, or how you might anything that might be different with Kelly that they would want the same. And does that make you feel perhaps overwhelmed, that if that was the case, you wouldn't know how to manage that?
Yeah, it's kind of like just frustration. Like ADHD is like it's an invisible disorder, right? I mean, like the ways that it plays out are not necessarily invisible, but for lots of people, and I think historically for lots of people, it's just been seen as, oh, that's a rowdy kid. The depth of it was never understood. So if Kelly was in a wheelchair, the kids could see that, oh, she needs special attention and assistance. When you just say something like ADHD to kids, they're like, okay, can I get some of that so that I can have that one-on-one time? And that I presume that would likely be what would happen with the fidget toys too. But I mean, we would figure out some kind of way for that too. But yeah, teaching in COVID, teaching these huge classes, it's frustrating. And yeah, it would also be overwhelming for sure. But just to me, it's just quite frustrating. And then to have this complaint put against me to the principal, and feeling like my job's in jeopardy when so many of my friends have lost their teaching contracts because of COVID, is just like, oh, what am I even going to do?
So, hearing from both of you, it strikes me that something that you share in common is an interest in wanting to see Kelly succeed. I'd, sense that is, kind of a real focal point for both of you. Now, you'd have different priorities, though, because you're coming at this from different perspectives, right? So, Dominique, when you talk about the experiences that Kelly's sharing with you, and you had mentioned even, having temper tantrums, that, I'm just going to take a hunch, and I hope you'll correct me if I don't have it quite right. But would it be fair to say one of your priorities in all of this is to be able to have, Kelly be happy when she's going to school?
Yeah, absolutely. Like 100%. And the thing is, like, she is like a social kid. Like, and what Demi says about, like, for a long time, people just thought that ADHD kids were just rowdy kids. Like, that really resonates for me, because her diagnosis is just, it's new too, and we're all still trying to figure it out as well. And like, as a parent, COVID's been really hard too. And because I do have such a social kid, like, even trying to get her to have any kind of social interactions in general has been really, really challenging, because we have to take safety into consideration. But like, she does way better when she can be around other kids. Sorry, it's just hard, because I'm really trying as a parent to make her life good. And just watching her be so upset going to school is so hard, because it is like something that she really loves, and it's so good for her. Like, her behavior at home is much worse when she has bad days at school. And like, I can appreciate teaching a special needs child is difficult, but like, raising a special needs child is difficult too. So we're all just really trying to do our best. And I think the main thing is just, I want her to be happy.
Well, thank you, Dominique. And, it's okay to have emotions in this kind of conversation. So we know, mediation is, it's not where like, I don't have any authority to tell people what to do, and I'm not trained as a counselor, and sometimes there's no way to be able to kind of go back in time and say, oh well, we can undo these things. But as far as being a place where you can just really be open and transparent with your emotions, to be able to build a plan for going forward, and whatever all needs to be part of that, certainly know that this is a place for that. But I also like to just check in sometimes when we're feeling strong emotions, just to say if it would be appropriate for a break, or how are you feeling about continuing the conversation?
I'm okay. I'm all right. I'm just a crier.
Well, to me, I saw that you were leaning forward and, kind of nodding along with what Dominique had to say. And I'm just wondering what further comments that you might have around Kelly in particular, and some of your, the hopes and goals that you might have for her in your classroom.
Yeah, she's really bright. She's really sociable. I know that Dominique has expressed that she struggles with math, but I think that what's actually going on for her is that maybe she's a little bit more advanced in her math skills than what we're teaching the other 9-year-olds. So I think that that's part of what's happening for her, is that it's a little too easy, and so then she's getting additionally distracted because the math is not engaging for her. So I would hope that we can come to some kind of strategy on how to foster that, because I know for a lot of folks that have ADHD or similar kinds of things going on for them, that when these things happen, then, you know, their passion kind of gets stifled because people are telling them to sit still or whatever it might be. I really try very hard not to, because I do have an understanding of what ADHD is like. It's just difficult to be like, how do I foster this kid's brilliance while also managing these other 28 kids in a pandemic, right? So, I mean, I don't want to be like jumping around to some solutions or anything like that, but maybe it's I know this doesn't really meet what Dominique's saying about the social element of school, but maybe for math classes, we kind of find something else for her to do, or maybe look further into the curriculum or something like that, and maybe that'll also help with her need for something special, you know, a special role or responsibility. We can be like, hey, you're the leader of the group, so you're actually going to be doing math that's a couple of weeks ahead in the curriculum, and then you're going to help me teach the other kids or something like that, you know, because she's really, like, she really is very bright, very sociable. She's a delight to have in class, and so much of what might be seen as problems with ADHD, you know, are going to be her strengths moving forward. So I definitely don't want her to feel like she has to mask what's going on for her, anything like that. But we really do need to find a strategy for how these other kids can get their work done. And I'm not going to lose my mind. And Kelly's also going to be able to succeed.
Right. Her success is what's important to both of you. And sorry, Dominique, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I'm just, you know, to me, you mentioned a possible option to consider in order to help you achieve that mutual goal of improving Kelly's educational experience. And so I'm just wondering, in light of the time, and I know we had other items on our agenda, some of which you've kind of talked a little bit while you were sharing the information you were sharing, but if maybe we'll just take a moment and let's create a goal statement, something that captures really what each of you has as your primary interests and that mutual interest of Kelly's, you know, happiness in that school environment and that she do well. And then we can just come up with some options, including the option that Demi identified, and see what we might be able to come up with as a plan before we end here today, if that sounds okay. So again, I'm going to just see about sharing my I might not share my whiteboard on this one, even though ideally I would like to, just because it's nice sometimes to be able to see that goal statement right in front of you. But let's just take a stab at this. So it sounds to me like something that's really important to you is to be able to manage that chaos that sometimes occurs in a large classroom. So you would like to have, and I'm trying to think of a good word to sort of represent that feeling. You would perhaps like to, you know, value maybe some organization, some predictability in the classroom, or either of those words kind of capturing it as a primary interest?
Yeah, I think order and peace.
Order and peace. Okay, so you really value the order and peace that, you know, would come from having that kind of discipline in the classroom. And for you, Dominique, you really value, like when you talk about what it's like at home and how difficult it is to be able to have some peace of mind in your home environment as well, and specific to when, like, Kelly is getting ready to go to school and talking about school. So is that peace of mind really kind of your primary interest, or would there be a different word that would capture it for you?
I think like my primary interest is just like Kelly wanting to go to school. I don't know how to make that more pithy, because like she really, really enjoys school. And I like the ideas that Demi has sort of thrown out there around like some ways that we could work with that, because I think my primary goal is just for her to like have fun in math class.
Right.
Not
right.
have to dread it.
Yeah, so that, maybe it's about, Kelly being enthusiastic and looking forward to something. So, for Demi, if we can find a way for Demi to be able to have some order in the classroom while Kelly maintains her enthusiasm for the classroom, and for both of you that in the outcome, Kelly is having the best experience possible in that educational environment. If that's really our goal, then thinking about what are some ways in which we can accomplish those things is really where we can go next. If that, unless there's anything else that's on either of your minds that you would like to share before we start thinking about some ideas and building further on what Demi's already suggested.
Good.
Okay, so when we're coming up with ideas, I would like to just caution you, don't feel like you need to start evaluating those ideas, right? Sometimes like, hey, that's a really good idea, let's do that, or no, I'd never do that in a million years. So we want to come up with a handful of different ideas, and then we'll take the opportunity to evaluate that, which ones are best, which ones you'd like to pursue, which ones maybe you need some more information about, but really which ones are best aligned with this goal statement of creating some order in the classroom for Demi, some real happiness, peace of mind at home for Dominique, specifically related to Kelly, wanting to go to school, and that at the heart of it all, where you have that mutual interest in Kelly having a good experience in the classroom. So, answering that question that brought you here is, what's going on for Kelly in in her educational pursuits, and how can we make that better? So we'll measure the options against those goals that you have for order and peace and enjoyment and success. So Demi, you had mentioned already about the possibility of giving her something to do during math time. Let's just come up with a few other things, and as ideas come to you, throw them out there. I'll jot them down, and we'll take the next few minutes just to get those creative juices flowing.
Okay, so I've got like a few, I guess, ideas that are kind of small, because one of the other things, like, I'd like for whatever we come up with to be something that can still, not create that situation Demi was talking about, where other kids are being like, oh, well, that seems like special treatment and I want that too, because I know that can get like sort of messy, and I actually don't think that Kelly would even really like that. But I wonder about things like, could she, maybe not because COVID, but like, could she hand out the worksheets, or could she help write on the board, or could she maybe get like a little bit more homework during class to work on during quiet time, and have it be like a game? Kelly, if you can answer 10 questions in 10 minutes, you get a sticker. Like making some of that homework just more engaging for her. So there's some ideas that I had.
I think it would be helpful if we could get some kind of messaging out to the other parents, to have like a sit down with their kids to talk about some of the things that we're going to be doing to support Kelly, so that they can have those conversations at home, and maybe that'll help them better understand anything unique that we're doing for Kelly that they aren't getting. Because specifically like the fidget toys, I think it would be really helpful from my perspective for keeping the classroom in order if she did have something to fidget with, because then I think she would be less likely to be pulling on her mask, pulling on other kids' masks, So if we can work on getting an exemption, and I'm not really sure if maybe we'll need a doctor's note and stuff like that. So we'll have to work out the logistics of how that all works, so that she can bring those fidget toys, and then getting the messaging out to the parents that, hey, Kelly needs this for her to be successful in school. I think it would be good for me to connect with the teacher who is teaching the grade 6 class and see what kind of math curriculum she's using and see if maybe I can get some of that. And then maybe I can design some worksheets that have, you know, some of the stuff that her peers are doing, but then also maybe a few of the other questions. And then that'll help me kind of assess how far ahead she is of the other kids, and then make sure that the materials that she's using are really engaging for her, because I know, like, if it's too easy, she's just going to turn off her brain and start fidgeting, right, with other kids and stuff. So I think those would be some strategies we could implement.
Yeah, I can definitely talk to the principal about, you know, what's needed for an exemption, because I know her doctor would have no problem getting a note. The other thing I wonder about is like seating plan. I don't know what your seating plan is like or where she's located, but she does, like, in my home, she does a little bit better if she feels like my eyeballs are on her. So like I said, I don't know what the seating plan is right now, but I wonder if we could experiment having her sit in different spots in the classroom, and see maybe if there are some students that she tends to be more distracting to, or less.
The two of you have come up with quite a handful of ideas. I've jotted them all down, and in light of the time that we have, I'd like to make a suggestion and see how this works for you, is that I would just do a summary of these different ideas that you've mentioned. And of course, if I didn't hear them quite correctly or I missed something, I would invite you to, you know, make sure that you give me that feedback so that we can have the clear list, as well as some of those important priorities and expectations, and the concerns and goals that you spoke to earlier. I think some of the assumptions that maybe that brought you here, that you had an opportunity to maybe clear up a little bit, but after today's meeting, there may be some other things that still kind of come to the surface for you. So remember that we can come back and continue the conversation and go back to our list of topics to talk about. But as far as providing you with a bit of summary of what we've talked about here, and specifically a list of these ideas that you've come up with so that you can reflect upon them, and then we could reconvene a meeting to evaluate those options, as well as any other ones that maybe you come up with in the interim. Remembering our goal here is to achieve the Kelly's. Now I just wrote down, you know, on our agenda we had, what is the plan going forward for Kelly's educational experience, right? So we're looking for a plan for Kelly's educational experience that allows Demi to have order in her classroom, allows Dominique to have some peace of mind in the home because she sees that Kelly is happy and wanting to go to school. So almost another way that I was thinking of framing is like you'd really value and you desire for Kelly to be engaged in school, right? And so order in Demi's classroom, that Kelly is engaged, and that mutual goal for both of you, that she's ultimately successful. So, you know, how can we structure a plan that achieves all of those things? So when you look at the list of the ideas that you've come up with, that's your measuring stick, really. And so I'll also, when I send you an email summary, I'll send you a few dates for options for us to consider to come back and pick up this conversation from here. And please, if you have any questions or concerns, or you think of something else in the interim, don't hesitate to give me a call or send me an email, so that we can keep this going forward. And I want to express my appreciation to both of you for your willingness to meet today, but also your willingness to have this open, frank conversation, because it can be difficult when you haven't had a chance to have the conversation, but you're both experiencing the impacts of the conflict that is going on in the background. So well done. It was nice to see you both again. And I will send you the email. If you don't see it in your inbox in, say, 24 hours, just give me a call in case it got caught in a spam filter somewhere. Do either of you have any questions before we end today?
No, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Have a great rest of your afternoon.